This is Pro Football Perspective. I am Nathaniel Bradley. Whether you're at home, work, the gym, in your car, or wherever you are, thanks for taking time out of your day to spend here. Pro Football Perspective is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, and YouTube. And of course, be sure to follow on Instagram at Pro Football Perspective. What's happening? Great episode last time out, getting some insights from NFLPA certified agent Jim Gaudiosi. If you missed that, go back and check that out. You'll actually enjoy the conversation and get some cool information that maybe you didn't know before. This week, we are returning to our GOAT quarterback series with our next scoring, grading metric that we're going to be using. The great Paul Bryant, if you don't know him, Google him. He once said, offense wins games, defense wins championships. So that quote has kind of stuck with us ever since, and not just in football, but across a number of different sports. Seems like the quote, though, in recent years has kind of shifted more towards myth than reality, at least in the case of professional football and some other team sports, basketball as well, I'm sure, as the game has become increasingly more friendly to offenses and quarterbacks in particular. Now, whether or not it's true that defense wins championships, there's arguments both for and against that are grounded in data and you name it, all kinds of examples, but that's not really what I want to look at. That's just the phrase that has kind of stuck in my brain. Even before I ever recorded a minute of this podcast, I wanted to explore the defenses of the teams that some of these all-time great quarterbacks played with. I wasn't quite sure how I would tie it in initially, but that phrase, defense wins championships, it just kept kind of pecking at my brain, especially as I was tabulating era-adjusted individual production scores for the GOAT group of quarterbacks here. So I knew I was going to dive into this in some form or fashion, but before I did, I needed to answer two questions. Why? Why would I look at this? And the second question is how? How would I actually do this in a impartial and data-driven analysis? So why would I discuss the defenses of the GOAT quarterbacks? Especially if I'm trying to just find out, one individual player and put them potentially at the top of the heap. Well, whether or not defense wins championships may be up for debate, but I know one thing is true. If you ask any fan, any scout, any player, any coach, any general manager, any water boy, if all else is equal on a team, would they rather have a good defense or a bad defense? Pretty straightforward question, pretty straightforward answer. 100 out of 100 will answer they want the good defense. Why? Because defense being good makes winning easier. This is not rocket science, okay? If a team has a good defense, they have a better opportunity to win a given game than they do if they have a bad defense, okay? Again, we're looking at this all else equal, all right? Now, is that all that controversial? I really feel like it's going to be controversial when I talk about some of these GOAT quarterbacks and their defenses that played with them. But what can I say? I'm not in the business business. That's funny to say out loud. I'm not in the podcasting world here to worry about whether something's controversial. I'm just focusing on the data, focusing on the common sense here. Remember, I'm trying to look at the nooks and crannies of who the greatest of all time quarterback is. And our collective wisdom, or lack thereof, has led us to believe that team success is one of, if not the strongest, indicators of greatness in a quarterback. That means that it makes sense to at least look at what factors exist that contribute to the win-loss record of a quarterback. The makeup and performance of the team around the quarterback have to count for something, don't they? So I want to know if the 16 greatest quarterbacks of all time had a little help from great defenses or not. I think it's fair to look at that, especially if I can measure the defense in a way where it is isolated from offensive and quarterback influence as much as possible. Meaning, how can I measure the defense of these great quarterbacks without acknowledging that they have a great quarterback? Likely, helping them out a bit here and there. Well, full disclosure, I can't. Okay? Just like you can't isolate any of these quarterbacks' individual production into a vacuum without acknowledging that they played with a great wide receiver or running back or had a great defense or a great coach. We can't completely neutralize everything, but I sure as hell tried. That brings me to the how part of this metric. How would I measure defensive support for these quarterbacks? And then how would I compare them to one another? For who knows how long, we've been hearing and using terms like scoring defense, passing defense, rushing defense, and total defense, all these different types of labels. TV graphics and broadcast analysts would tout these statistical trackers to inform the fans of which defenses were good and which defenses were bad. Then came the dawn of advanced stats, and some talking heads shifted their attention to things like yards per play, if it better fit their narrative. And then there's always the attitude of coaches and players that winning the turnover battle in any given game is one of the strongest indicators out there as to which team will actually win the game itself. So, of course, there's value in a defense that generates takeaways in the minds of those players and coaches and supporters of that narrative. Well, I'm here to tell you that all of those are good baselines to begin with. They are. You have to start somewhere, but none of those gives you a true indication of whether or not a defense is truly good or bad. None. I'll address the traditional scoring defense and total defense first. They simply measure total points and yards divided by games played. First of all, these are counting stats. An average of the points or yards allowed per game doesn't really tell me anything but how effective a defense can be expected to be on a drive or on a play-by-play basis. It also fails to show the effectiveness of the defense while it's on the field because it doesn't isolate the defense enough from the influences of their corresponding offense. Great ball control offense can create the illusion of an above-average defense because it limits the exposure on a per-game basis by limiting the number of actual possessions the opposing offense has. Passing defense and rushing defense can make someone think they can be graded categorically, but that's another mirage, unfortunately. Yes, a team's actual categorical performance can match the associated ranking for passing or rushing, but that doesn't mean it's the proper way to measure it. That's just coincidence. Trying to look at passing and rushing separately just opens things up for too much influence from the offense as well as from the complementary defensive unit. If you have a high-scoring offense that forces the opponent into a come-from-behind or shootout type situation, your defense is likely going to have a worse passing defensive grade than what reality is. And a better rush defense than what is actually true on the field simply due to the situation that they're not running the ball as often. You could also have some type of category measurement for a pass rush that is seen as great simply because the offense that you're playing against is constantly having to come from behind and in passing situations. So you see where I'm going with that? Just stay away from them. Stay away from passing defense, rushing defense, total points allowed, scoring defense, total yards allowed. No, just stay away from it. Yards per play. That's kind of sort of on the right track, actually. You might actually hear ex-players and coaches talk about this one sometimes nowadays. They'll say things like, actually, such and such defense may look great because they have these splash plays, but they're actually ranked 5th to last in the league in yards per play allowed. So, I mean, that sounds like, wow, they must actually be pretty bad because you don't want to be 5th to last in the league. Plus, the guy in the suit that used to play in the NFL said it. So, golly gee whiz, that must be right. No, it's not right. Okay, I'll just say it. It's not right. No disrespect to anybody using those stats. They don't tell you the whole picture. They're a good baseline. That's what they are. Yards per play is thrown around a lot, but the reality is that yards per play actually doesn't have a wide range of variation amongst 32 teams. Yes, there is a number 1 team, and yes, there's a number 32 team every season. But the difference from first to last is typically less than 2 yards. Okay, so I can hear everybody shouting right now. Yes, 2 yards per play over the course of the game is a big difference, sure. But 5.4 yards per play versus 5.7 yards per play, those defenses are not vastly different in terms of their performance. Yet, you might see one of those ranked 10th in the league and one ranked 21st in the league. So throwing around the rankings of where a team is in terms of yards per play doesn't really do anything but support the narrative of the TV personality or the producer of the show. Okay, it's not giving you the whole picture. Last category here, turnovers. Apple, cherry, blueberry. I love them all, really. Football turnovers, of course. The moments in the game where people like spill their drinks and chips because of just the dramatic shift in momentum. I actually agree that turnovers are something that should be looked at in a determining factor of how good or bad a defense is. Possessing the ball is extremely underrated. If you can remove a possession from the opposition and give your team an extra possession, that has a massive impact on the outcome of a game, especially if you have a great quarterback. So a defense that generates turnovers is a huge help to any of the 16 QBs in the GOAT group. So measuring turnovers as a total throughout the season just doesn't quite really fit in. Again, it's a counting stat. So how would I measure a defense's performance? Points per play above or below the league average expressed as a percentage. Yards per play above or below league average expressed as a percentage. And plays per takeaway above or below the league average expressed as a percentage. So let me dive into this. Okay, first and foremost here, points per play allowed. So what you're going to do is essentially measure the total number of plays that a defense had on the field, total number of points allowed. You'll figure out, okay, now we got points per play. Then you're going to take the league average, okay, total number of plays on average the defenses across the league had in a given season, and the total number of points allowed by the defenses in a given season, and you'll figure out the league average points per play. Take the team you're looking at, divide their points per play allowed by league average points per play allowed, subtract 1, boom, you got a percentage. Example time, the 2000 Baltimore Ravens, they were essentially 0.18 points per play. That's minuscule. I get it. Hard to really kind of figure out what does that actually mean. The league average that year was 0.33 points per play. So what we're looking at is you divide those numbers, subtract 1, you get the Baltimore Ravens in 2000 were 45% better than the league average in terms of scoring defense. Okay, that it confirms what we knew. They were awesome, but it's a better way of measuring it. Okay. Next, yards per play. Okay, we already know how this works. Okay, you take the total yardage allowed and divide by the total plays that the defense has been on the field. What we're going to do, though, is yards per play allowed by the defense you're looking at divided by the league average, and then that'll be expressed in a percentage. Again, let's look at the Baltimore Ravens. Okay, on the field for 924 plays, they allowed 4.3 yards per play. Now, the league average that season was actually 5.1 yards per play. So the Baltimore Ravens wound up being 16% better than the league average. in 2000. Okay, again, confirming they were good. We get it, yeah. Plays per takeaway. Now that's a term that's probably, I don't know, maybe I can put a little TM after that. We'll see. I want to measure how frequently the defense is coming away with a takeaway. How often are they forcing a turnover? Basically, you're going to, again, you take a total number of turnovers now, and you divide that by the number of plays that the defense was on the field. And that's going to give you a frequency. The lower number, the better. Okay? The 2000 Baltimore Ravens generated 49 turnovers that year. On the field for 924 plays. That's 18.86 plays per takeaway. So every 19 plays, they're getting a turnover. The league average that year was 33.47 plays per takeaway. So on average, most of the defenses, you're looking at 65 to 70 plays a game. Typically, probably less back then. I'd have to take a look. Most defenses are coming with almost 2 turnovers a game, and Baltimore that season was coming up with 3 or 4. So incredible season in terms of plays per takeaway and just getting their offense extra possessions and obviously taking possessions away from the opposition. Yes, they were 44% better than the league average that year. So again, that just confirms what we know, that they were awesome. Now, when it comes to grading these 3 categories, points per play delta, I'm saying delta. That's what I want to use. I want to use delta in here. I think it's a good term, real smart like. Yards per play delta and plays per takeaway delta. It's simple. The lower the number, the better the defense was in that given category. So I'm looking at this and I'm saying, okay, I gotta figure out top to bottom now. Okay, if they're 30% better than league average, that's an elite defense. 20 to 30%, that's a great defense. 10 to 20% better than league average, that's good. 5 to 10% better than league average, that's just above average. Any score or grade that falls within 5% on better or worse than the league average, I just put them in the average bucket. Okay, that's a very small variation from the average. So if you're 5% above or below that, it's average. 5 to 10% below the league average, that's a below average defense. 10 to 20% below the league average, that's a bad defense. 20 to 30% below the league average, that's a terrible defense. And 30% or more below the league average, that's an atrocious defense. I spent a lot of time looking at thesaurus here. I think atrocious is appropriate, though. So that's how we would grade these defenses. And I went through and I graded the defenses for every qualifying season of the quarterbacks of the GOAT group. Qualifying meaning a season in which the QB played at least 7 games. Each defense was given a grade for points per play delta, yards per play delta, and plays per takeaway delta. Then an overall grade for the season was assigned by simply averaging the scores from each of those 3 categories. An overall score across the career of each quarterback was assigned by averaging the overall grade for all qualifying seasons. So these grades will tell us who of the 16 quarterbacks in the GOAT group played with the best overall defense and the worst overall defense. It's also going to tell us which quarterbacks had the best and worst scoring defenses, which quarterbacks had the best and worst single-season defenses. There's a ton of information that we can be really looking at and can be gleaned from this evaluation. By measuring defenses in this way, we can closely, of course not perfectly, compare if the steel curtain or the doomsday defenses of the 70s Steelers and Cowboys were better, worse, or comparable to the defenses that Bart Starr or Joe Montana had on their teams during their careers. So, cool stuff. Now, before we get to the rankings of these players, I'll throw out the standard disclaimer. I'm ranking these quarterbacks in reverse order from quarterback with the best defenses for his career to the quarterback with the worst defenses for his career. This doesn't necessarily mean that number one on this metric is the undisputed GOAT. It just means that on a consistent basis throughout their career, that player had to overcome a poor performing defense compared to the other quarterbacks on this list and compared to league average in general, most likely. That's all it means. It means the number 16 quarterback on this list, that doesn't mean they're a bum. It means that they had just a slight advantage in terms of the defensive performance that they had on their team during their career. I also want to mention, and while I've said this multiple times, I do believe that this will have a strong link to team success. I don't think it's fair to link this to previous evaluation that we did of era-adjusted individual production, though. That's a separate metric. There may be some aha moments where you say, oh, look at that. But I really don't think there's a good way to link individual performance to defensive support. They're separate, not necessarily dependent or reflective of one another. Okay, and with that, let's get to it. Oh, before I go any further, again, Instagram, @ProFootballPerspective. I've got visual aids there for you. Okay, we're getting back into the numbers part of this podcast. That's why I bring that up. If you follow along on Instagram @ProFootballPerspective, you get more out of this podcast. You'll be able to see visually what I'm discussing here. I have it color coded and everything. It's great. Check it out @ProFootballPerspective on Instagram. Okay, now let's get to it. Number 16 on this list here, Otto Graham. After ranking first in overall individual production, Otto Graham now ranks 16th in defensive support. No knock on him, just means that he had defensive support like nobody else in the GOAT group. 10-year career, 3 separate categories, points per play delta, yards per play delta, and plays per takeaway delta. That gives us 30 possible category grades for Otto Graham's career. And the defenses of his teams had only 1 below average grade out of 30, and that was plays per takeaway in 1952. In other words, 96% of the evaluated instances that we looked at here were at or above league average. Per category for his career, the defenses Graham played with averaged elite level points per play delta, 34% better than the league average, and that's over the course of his 10-year playing career. Graham's defenses were also good in yards per play delta, 15% better than the league average for his career. And over the course of his career, Graham's defenses had an above average plays per takeaway delta of 9% better than the league average. Season by season, the overall performance of Graham's defenses was consistently good to great. The 1946 season was the best defense that Graham had, overall grade of 33% better than the league average. That's elite level. The 1952 season was the worst defense that Graham had, just 4% better than the league average, but still within that average category. So the worst defense Graham ever had for a season still wasn't that bad. He had 1 season where his defense had an average overall score, 1 season with an above average defense, 3 seasons with a good defense, 4 seasons with great defenses, and 1 season with an elite defense. All told, Graham's career defensive support was 19.93% better than league average. Nearly a great defense just on average across his entire career. So as I said, being number 16 in this category or this metric that I'm looking at doesn't by any stretch mean that Otto Graham was a scrub, as we already saw in our first metric. It also doesn't mean that The great defensive performances of his career somehow had a causal relationship with his individual production, or vice versa. Just another way to look at the quarterback, and with that, let's look at our next one. Number 15 is Terry Bradshaw. So Bradshaw also played with high-level defenses throughout his career. I think reputation would align with that. Out of 39 possible category grades over Terry Bradshaw's qualifying seasons, the defenses on his teams had only one below-average grade, and that was plays per takeaway in 1971, and only 10 were average. The rest were above average or better defensive grades. In other words, 97% of the evaluated instances were at or above league average, and 74% of the evaluation instances were above average. Per category, for his career, the defenses Bradshaw played with had good points per play delta, 19% better than league average. Bradshaw's defenses were above average in yards per play delta at 8%, better than the league average. And over the course of his career, Bradshaw's defenses graded out as good in points per play, or plays per takeaway, plays per takeaway delta, 15% better than league average. Season by season, the overall performance of Bradshaw's defenses, again, good to great. The 1976 season was the best defense Bradshaw had. It was 30% better than league average, and that's an elite defense. The 1971 season was the worst defense that Bradshaw had, 4% worse than the league average, but still within that average category, so not too bad. Bradshaw had 3 seasons where the defense had an average overall score, 2 seasons with an above average defense, 3 seasons with a good defense, 4 seasons with a great defense, and 1 season with an elite defense. Bradshaw's career, his defensive support was 14.65% better than the league average. So, hey, take that for what it's worth. Like I said, it kind of matches reputation. The Steel Curtain was the real deal. Enough said. Now, number 14 on this list here, Bart Starr. Starr played with some stout defense throughout his playing days. 39 possible categories were graded among Bart Starr's qualifying seasons, and the defenses on his teams had 7 below average grades and only 2 average grades. So 82% of the instances evaluated were at or above league average, and 77% of the instances were above league average. Per category for his career, the defenses Starr played with graded out as good for points per play delta at 17%, better than the league average. Starr's defenses were above average in yards per play delta at 7%, better than the league average. And over the course of his career, Starr's defenses graded out as above average in plays per takeaway delta, 8% better than league average. Season by season, Starr's defenses right up there with the best year in and year out, with the exception of the 1958 season when the defense graded out as terrible, 24% worse than the league average. The 1962 season was the best defense that Starr had, and that was 32% better than the league average. That's elite. He had 1 season where the defense was terrible, 3 seasons with an average defense, 5 seasons with a good defense, 3 seasons with a great defense, and 1 season with an elite defense. Altogether, Starr's career defensive support was 11.28% better than the league average. And that brings us to number 13 on this metric, and the final quarterback that we're going to be looking at this week, Tom Brady. Brady's forever linked to Bill Belichick, whether people like it or not. And one of Bill's hallmarks is, of course, his defense and unique game planning on a week-to-week basis. So for the entirety of Brady's career, even the past couple of years with Tampa Bay, his defenses haven't been bad. Tom Brady's longevity really showed here when I started working these numbers out. 60 possible categories to grade from, 20 seasons qualifying, 3 categories, 60 grades here. The defenses on teams with Tom Brady playing quarterback had 8 below average grades out of 60 and 13 average grades out of 60. So 86% of the instances of evaluation were at or above league average, and 65% of the instances of evaluation were above league average. Per category for his career, the defenses that Brady has played with so far, they've graded out as good in points per play delta, 15% better than league average. Brady's defenses have been average in yards per play delta, at 1% better than league average for his career. We'll touch more on that toward the end of this particular metric. Yards per play, as I mentioned, it's really hard to separate it, for a defense to separate itself nowadays in the NFL in terms of yards per play. So Brady's defenses have been average in yards per play, and that's not surprising, as it won't be for any of the other quarterbacks that have played kind of in this past 20 years or so. But back to it here. Over the course of his career, Brady's defenses so far have graded out as above average in plays per takeaway delta, 9% better than league average. His lowest performing defense in terms of an overall score for a season was 2017, when the defense graded out as below average with an overall grade right at 5% worse than the league average. The 2019 season was the best defense Brady had, actually. 30% better than the league average, elite level defense there. Brady has had one season where the defense had a below average overall score, 3 seasons with an average defense, 5 seasons with an above average defense, 8 seasons with a good defense, 2 seasons with a great defense, and 1 season with an elite defense so far. All told, Brady's career defensive support has been 8% better than the league average. So there you have it so far. We've got Otto Graham at number 16 in defensive support, Terry Bradshaw at number 15 in defensive support, Bart Starr at number 14 in defensive support, and Tom Brady at number 13 in defensive support. Now, full disclosure here, this is just a lens of evaluation, and it does not mean that Otto Graham had the best defenses of all time. Although I guess I didn't check. Maybe he does. I don't know. What it means is that within this group of 16 quarterbacks, the defenses of Otto Graham's teams outperformed their peers within the league at that time at a higher rate than the defenses of the other 15 quarterbacks. That's what it means. And they did it to the tune of 20%, almost 19.93%. Big gap between Otto Graham's defensive support and that of Terry Bradshaw at 14.65%. And then there's another big gap down to Bart Starr's defensive support at 11.28% better than league average. So we're rapidly approaching the area where most of these guys' defenses are getting clumped close to average. Okay, Tom Brady's at 8.85% better than league average. We're getting to the point where, as I said, this is a good evaluation tool. It's a good lens to look at how a defense may have maybe contributed to team success. I don't think it's linked to individual performance necessarily, but a good lens and evaluation tool. And hey, that's what we're here for. We're trying to, like I said, introduce new tools so that we can use them in our favorite debates with our office coworkers or neighbor across the street that we hate the Bears banner in their garage or the Raiders banner or what have you. Being able to talk about the real way to evaluate a player or a team or a defense, that's kind of what we're here for, bringing those insights and new tools to your discussion. Thanks again for joining Pro Football Perspective. On our next episode, we'll be continuing this evaluation, so be on the lookout for that coming soon. Pro Football Perspective is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, YouTube, and of course be sure to follow along on Instagram at Pro Football Perspective. I'm Nathaniel Bradley. Deuces.